All right, we are live at 2024 Apartmentalize. Thank you to Reba for creating the space for us to record content. Igor, thanks for sharing some time with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here. Excited to be in Philadelphia.
So you are the chief economist of Apartmentalist. What does a chief economist do?
Well, great question. My role is to try to get the company smarter about the market so that we understand the landscape of what's happening outside the walls of Apartment List, but then also bring it the other way. So use what all the amazing data that we generate while we're running our marketplace, all the amazing insights that we have access to. We want to make sure we share that with our partners in the broader world. So bringing information from the market to Apartment List, bringing Apartment List data out to the market.
So you just gave a talk at our booth.
Yeah,
Love
it was fun.
to hear a couple highlights. How'd the talk go? What was the theme?
Oh, it was great. I love NAA as a chance to really just reflect on the last year and all the things that we've learned and the research that we've done and all the things that have changed in the market since last NAA. So my talk was called The Big Five, and I tried to just highlight, basically if you're an attendee of NAA, you don't want to be bombarded with data. And so I tried to just distill what are the 5 trends that you should keep an eye out for that might help you affect leasing strategy, operations, things that as you're watching, if things start to change in the market, you should kind of have your spidey sense on to pay attention.
So one of the opening remarks you made was about the roller coaster, and you talked about this boom, this drop.
Exactly.
Based on where we're at today, is it safe to say that rents are going to stay steady throughout the remainder of FY24?
Yes. So just the context now of the rent roller coaster we've been through is wild, because the 2010s were really pretty stable, right? When we started tracking rents, maybe your market's growing 3 or 4%, 3.2, 3.5. Then the market, as soon as COVID hit, the market went wild. So we saw really strong rent drops in some part of the country. 2021, we saw this housing market boom, both in the for sale market and in the rental market. Prop rents went through the roof, up 17% nationally, far more in some of the hottest markets. And then we've ridden the roller coaster back down. So rent growth has really slowed, and we're actually tracking negative year-over-year rent growth right now. And so to answer your question, we do expect rents to be more or less steady and flat through the end of the year. And the reason is that there's a tremendous amount of new multifamily supply, new construction, new lease-ups hitting the market. The demand is there. It's just swimming upstream in a sea of new inventory. And that new inventory is really keeping a pretty tight lid on where rents can go. So not much action on the rent front, following just a tremendous whiplash that everyone's been feeling over the last few years.
Yeah. Even with the decline we felt, we're still not at pre-pandemic prices.
No, far from it.
How is that impacting renter behavior in the space?
Far from it. I think, everyone's life felt like it changed a little bit in 2020 and 2021, and everyone's living situation changed as a result. Some people moved up life decisions. Some people were able to work remotely, and all of a sudden that spurred a move. Some people got some stimulus funding and were able to move to a new place. Some people found deals in places like New York and San Francisco that saw rent declines that they hadn't seen in decades. And so there was this big game of musical chairs that happened in the market, and that was really driving a lot of the action, a lot of the rent increases. A lot of the apartment inventory was getting gobbled up. Everyone then kind of found their chair. Yeah. And then interest rates started to go up. Consumer sentiment started to waffle a little bit. And people started kind of holding on to their chairs, in this musical chairs game. And so now we're seeing the activity come back. But because that supply is hitting the market back from the time that's reacting to really that big boom in demand, it means that rents are down a little bit from their peak, which is basically summer of 2022. But when you look back to where we entered the decade, we're 20+% higher than where rents were. So I sometimes use the analogy, it's like a balloon bouncing around that all of a sudden escaped into a room with a higher ceiling, and now it's just, we're at this new ceiling, and there's no sense that we're going back down to a pre-pandemic rent level, but the growth has slowed and stopped. So it's a tricky question right now, what's happening with the rents, because it really depends on your perspective and the time frame, but that's where we are in the U.S. rental market right now. But then you look by region, and different operators and renters in different parts of the country are actually feeling a pretty different environment right now too.
Are there any cities that surprise you, whether it's a good or a bad, on how they're performing?
Yeah.
Any that kind of catch you off guard, surprise you?
I think there are a few surprises. I mean, Austin, Texas just continues to boom. Austin now is basically what Vegas was in the 90s and 2000s, just every year leading the country in new construction per capita. That's true in multifamily, it's true in single family, and good bet that Austin's going to have some professional sports teams,
For sure.
in a decade. And so that's the market that is sort of on the extreme end of seeing pretty strong rent declines right now. Not because it's not popular, but because there's so much there's so many new lease ups hitting the market. On the other end of the spectrum, Midwest markets are on a little bit of a tear. So places like Chicago, Louisville, Kansas City. I think it's been a long time since anyone in the industry could have said that the Midwest is dominating the rent growth power rankings. But that's where we are right now, because those are markets that aren't building as much. Renters don't have as many options. There's there's more pricing power in the Northeast and the Midwest. And so the list of top growers for rents just looks so different than it did 5 years ago or at any point during the pandemic rental market. So there continue to be a lot of surprises popping up. And then there are kind of these interesting outliers, like San Francisco is always waffling primarily based on kind of the way remote work has had a tremendous effect on it, and the ups and downs of the technology industry. So there's a lot of interesting kind of nuanced storylines when we look down at the market level.
So I have a curveball for you.
Yes, I love a curveball.
We're looking at this phenom, Caitlin Clark.
Yes.
Who has been drafted by the WNBA into one of the lowest ranked teams, the Indiana Fever.
Yep.
And day over day, every record is being absolutely, broken.
Shattered.
Whether it's attendance in arenas
Right.
or online viewership. Has there ever been correlation from a data standpoint to see something like that actually impact how a market can perform? Or is it too tertiary?
It's interesting. I mean, typically it'll go the other way around,
Okay.
where the kind of activity outside of housing will sort of, usually it's been like this. You start with the jobs.
Yep.
And where the kind of economic activity is, then the housing follows, and then everything takes off as a result. I mean, I sort of joked about a good bet being Austin getting a new sports team. Like Vegas was a sure bet to basically become a major U.S. metro based on how it was growing and building in the 90s and 2000s, because it was kind of playing the role of relative construction dominator back then. But you do see some interesting, blips in rental demand on kind of interesting factors, but it tends to be on a shorter time frame. A great example is like in the short-term rental market, the eclipse does crazy things to short-term rental demand, right, and things like that. And so, I haven't seen a Caitlin Clark effect in housing yet. I'm just still reeling from Cameron Brink hurting her ACL.
Well, it's June 20th, 2024. I'm making the call that there will be a Caitlin Clark effect in multifamily.
I'll be tracking.
We'll see.
I'll be tracking the Indiana market.
Okay. So one of the headlines has been that vacancies are starting to creep up.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously so much supply that's coming in. Are you hearing a common sentiment from property owners, things they should be thinking about to prepare for this, or anything you're advising people to be thinking about?
Right. I think that everyone's feeling a very competitive environment on the supply side. Going into this year, there were almost 1 million units, multifamily units under construction, which is a record as long as we've been tracking that data. And so I think everyone knew that it was going to be a pretty fiercely competitive environment, but we didn't quite know how long it was going to last. Mm-hmm. I think what we're really seeing right now is that there's really a lot of runway in the supply. The pipeline is really strong. Demand is coming back, but I think 2025 is going to continue to feel a lot like 2024 for the industry, because there's just so much. The wave hasn't crested yet in multifamily supply, and there's been a lot of units got jammed up in the pipeline because there was a really favorable low interest rate, high housing demand environment. But then it took forever to get these units online because there were all these, we remember from kind of the pandemic economy, these labor shortages, these supply shortages. This week you can't get this material, next week you can't get that material. And so it's taken a while for the units to come online, and now they're really flooding the market. And so especially in the Sunbelt markets, especially in the Mountain West markets, I think a lot of operators are really feeling the pressure and are kind of coming up with more creative strategies to, in addition to pricing, to kind of drive new demand and awareness.
So on the topic of supply, we're hearing about some competition within multifamily construction. Can you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, the lot of lease ups are hitting the market. We're basically going to have close to a record number of completions this year, and that really means that renters have options. And when renters have options, they shop for deals. We know renters are very price sensitive, especially right now, and that drives a lot of pricing pressure. And I think that's really what we're seeing in the data. One of the other interesting things, though, and I keep trying to sort of remind people about, especially at a conference like this, you also need to have kind of a global view on competition if you're a multifamily operator. So renters aren't just choosing within multifamily; they're choosing between multifamily rentals and single-family rentals, long-term rentals and more flexible short-term rentals. A tremendous amount of kind of younger adults their decision is actually, do I rent or do I live at home? We see 1 in 3 young adults living in their parents' home right now. There's an amazing number of just spare bedroom inventory in the US that's both allowing for remote work to accelerate and basically just creating this sort of group of renters on the sidelines that creating a big opportunity that as soon as the conditions are right, they're going to come in and snatch up the inventory. So it's also always worth saying kind of where's competition coming from outside of the industry, because the choice sets of renters keep getting more and more dynamic. And that creates some pressure and also I think some opportunities.
Yeah. You mentioned remote work.
Yeah.
It's certainly on the rise. It certainly seems like it's here to stay. Even though that's probably one of the great debates along businesses, but we're definitely seeing it stick around.
Absolutely.
What kind of impacts are you seeing both to the market as well as the actual expectations that renters have and preferences?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of it feels like it's still a boardroom debate, but it's very much, I think, decided when we look at the numbers on remote work. Essentially, fully employed work days worked from home have basically stabilized at 30%, which is a tremendous amount. So like basically 1 in 3 work days are happening at home. That kind of includes people that are full-time, remote, and hybrid. And so I think if there's a perception that this was something that spiked during the pandemic and is now back to normal, like, that's absolutely wrong. We're at a totally different level, which is really interesting. And one of the things that we found in the data is that, so, you look at the numbers on folks that work from home full time. It's about 11% of the workforce. When you look at kind of Class A multifamily, that number's closer to 20%.
Wow.
When you look at high income renters that are moving in the latest year of the census, it's actually over 40%. And so there's a really big overlap, I think, between those Americans that are working remotely and those that are looking for the new multifamily supply that's hitting the market and are actually kind of like right in the center of a lot of the target consumer audiences of, a lot of folks here at NAA. And so that almost creates this question that operators need to answer for themselves. Like, what is our philosophy on how we're attracting those remote workers? Because they have high incomes and they're untethered. So they're like these free agents in the economy that are ready to go move to whatever city and community is going to be right for them. They're very mobile. They're wealthier on average than the rest of the employed workforce. And so they're really deciding where the heat goes. And I think that creates a big opportunity for properties. And I've heard different kind of stories on how properties are trying to attract those renters. I think some people are thinking about different floor plans. Some people are trying to take a cue more from kind of the like tech campuses or college campuses. Like, how do you create friendly, more flexible work environments at the community level? But it's definitely something I think you need to have a perspective on once you see kind of these numbers on how remote work is here to stay, and especially prevalent in the target demographic of premium multifamily.
I'm even hearing that it's impacting amenity selection or how they're thinking about revisiting amenity selection. Hey, we spent $100,000 on this golf simulator,
Right.
but hey, we have a bunch of side hustlers who actually run podcast, studios.
Absolutely.
So we're going to rehab that area. So I think there's a lot to be talked about there.
Absolutely, and you can get really creative with it.
Yeah.
I think, which is exciting, and even you do it at the unit level. Think like, well, maybe we don't need the dining area. Maybe we need a work area. I think, or even something as simple as like, people are looking at apartments, thinking about what their Zoom background is going to look like, right? Right, and that's like, it sounds silly, really important to the modern renter. How do you advertise that? How do you create that space? And so how do you get them into a community rather than saying, oh, hey, mom and dad have a spare bedroom? That's easier.
So as a chief economist, what's the top question you get when you talk to media or when you talk to people outside of our business that are curious about what's going on?
The biggest question I get is a wonky one. It's usually, recently, they're all questions about the Federal Reserve, because it's been interesting. I mean, rents are always, they're basically kind of the key metric for our industry, but they've also taken on this big importance in the broader discussion of inflation, because the Federal Reserve is watching what's happening to rents in order to understand just general price increases. And we know that rent and housing costs, that's the biggest component of any American's budget, if they're independently paying for housing. And so that's been the biggest question, is what's happening with rents insofar as how's it going to affect what the Federal Reserve does? Because everyone in our industry and beyond is wondering, are rates going to come down? Are we going to see rate cuts? And so, kind of, when I talk to national reporters and other economic commentators, I think that's been a really big topic this year.
So you're sitting on a ton of data,
Mm-hmm.
and your team is always analyzing what's happening today, thinking about tomorrow. You've got to have a hot take for the industry. Maybe it's unpopular. What's an Igor hot take?
Well, I think we talked through some of them. I mean, it kind of depends on who you talk to. I think that remote work is here to stay, kind of has become a hot take. I think that what's my hot take? I think that for some people, I think it's a hot take that I'm really bullish on the Bay Area. We're a San Francisco-based company. I think San Francisco is going to have a killer decade. Depending on who you talk to, that's a hot take.
I like that.
And I think just generally, right, there's so much technological opportunity for the industry, and so much we can learn from other industries and adjacent technologies as well. So I think we're just going to see a tremendous amount of change. I think it's going to really favor those people that really have their antennas perked up to understand both how things are changing within our industry, but also how the world is changing kind of beyond a conference like this. And so, I'm bullish on the Bay Area. I'm also just generally bullish on the rental market.
So as you think about being bullish on the Bay, the last question I have for you is, if you had to pick a city and state to move to outside of where you live today, where would that be and why?
City and state outside of where I live today. I've been in California for most of my life, and I'm a big West Coast fan. So I might go, if I had to leave California, I'd go Pacific Northwest. I'd probably be a Seattle.
You do well in Seattle.
I'd probably be a Seattle guy. Yeah, but I love Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia is my vote for most underrated city in the U.S. I really like it here.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
Well, Igor, I want to say thank you for recording some content. To the team at Reba, thanks for creating the space to record. It's been a heck of an Apartmentalize, and we'll hope to do the same thing next year.
Thanks so much, Mike.